evening, fishing friends, and welcome to another episode. Today we're talking about paddle tail swim baits. And this is a request from a few folks who have asked about the new paddle tails that I've been using. That's these, the GrandeBass Kickback Shad. I got a box of these in a few different colors, so what do you say we'll take a closer look at some of these. We'll discuss how they compare to some similar paddle tails on the market. I'll discuss my 3 easy and the most common ways that I rig these things. And finally, we'll head over to a segment that I call Hank's Corner. You all probably know him a little bit better as the BassGeek. But enough yapping, let's get in for a closer look at some. All right, this is the GrandeBass Kickback Shad. Now, I'm a big fan of the GrandeBass stuff. You've heard me talk about it before. It's kind of neat because you don't hear a lot out of them. You know, they're kind of one of those low-key, almost underground companies that still does make the stuff here in the USA. But today we're talking about the 4.8-inch Kickback Shad. Now, currently that is the only size, 4.8 inches. I hope maybe they'll add a 3-inch or something like that down the road, but for now, this is it. I think they have 15 total colors when I checked Tackle Warehouse. I grabbed a few of them, so let's take a look. Okay, the first color happens to be the Killer Shad. So this is a nice one. This is the one I've used the most, actually. It's got like a smoky up top, purple flake. Bottom is like a translucent silver flash flake in it. I like that. I like that color a lot. Again, the Killer Shad. Next is a very cool natural color. This is called the Baitfish 2K. And check out this one. Again, that smoky color up top, almost a transparent smoky color with those black flakes. You can see it breaks up that solid color. Down below you turn it, it's got kind of a whitish, almost translucent belly with all kinds of different sparkles in there on the bottom. So I'm liking that color a lot too. Very natural. Didn't even notice that till now. They even have their logo on the tail. It's kind of cool. Again, that color there is the Baitfish 2K. All right, next up, what I think would be a pretty darn good pond lure, the Hot Shot color. You can see this one here has a watermelon red flake on top. You turn it down, it's almost got like a gold red flake and a almost green pumpkin-y pearl bottom. Interesting. I'm not sure about that color. I think that would be a darn good pond one though. Again, that is the Hot Shot. I'm digging that one. Some stained and dirty water, salty margarita. You can see that. That's your chartreuse, and it's almost got like a pearl chartreuse bottom. It's kind of a mix together. It's not a real hard pearl, but you can see there's chartreuse with that pearl belly, sparkles all the way through it. Salty margarita. Looking for a bluegill imitation, we got the bluegill flash. You can see there that's kind of got that blue copperish gold top, that pearl sparkly belly on the bottom, that bluegill color. I bet some bluegill eaters around here will eat that. Again, that's the bluegill flash. Next up is the bait ball color, a very common color paddle tail that I throw. You can see it's got white there, kind of a clear translucent silver flash on the bottom. Very common color that I throw. That white you can mimic, you know, crappie, shad, wiper, hybrid bass. You know, there's a ton of different things you can mimic with a white color. So again, that's the bait ball. Now, if you want more of a realistic bluegill color, that's the ballistic gill. That's more of kind of those bluegill colors you're thinking about. You see those flashing there up top, kind of a green pumpkin with all sorts of different flakes up top. Bottom's more of that sunfish color, that kind of orangish color. That again is the ballistic gill. Next up, the Tennessee Shad. Very good natural color, you know, in that real clear water. It's almost a translucent top. The bottom's just going to give off flash. So you've got flash and a translucent looking top. Good clear water color. That is the Tennessee Shad. Next is a color that works well on my local lake, Blue Chartreuse Extreme. To me, this is just a sexy shad color. Blue top, chartreuse on the bottom, and again, you got some glitter on it. Definitely going to have to put that to work spring on my lake. This one they call the Blue Chartreuse Extreme. Okay, last but not least, Big Bass Magic. Now this almost reminds me of that smallmouth magic. I think that's what it's called in the Rage Swimmer line. I'm not sure what it's called in the Kitech, but you can see they're kind of the blue-green sparkle up top with that green top, then that pearl bottom. No sparkles on that one, just a flat pearl bottom. Again, that one is Big Bass Magic. I forgot to tell you, you get 6 in a pack, and I think they're $5.99 for a pack. Pretty similar to, and that's what some people ask me about, is how do they compare to, you know, like a Kitech? A pack of 5 of these is $6.99. Now, some people really like, you know, the scent. These do have the scent on them as well. They call it the Mega 5 Extreme. The Kitechs are great. I've used those for a long time, and I'll continue using them. But I know one big thing that myself and other people talk about is the durability of these. You know, they've almost got so much salt in them that sometimes you catch 1 or 2 fish on them and they're done. Now, one thing I noticed that GrandeBass said they did to kind of help with the durability, you can see there they did make a thicker tail section where this boot tail connects to the bait. The section in the middle is thicker as opposed to the Kitech. They've actually also made the tail itself a little bit thicker too. So they say that's supposed to help with durability. I'm not sure. So far, I've not had any durability issues with them, but I know that kind of is a complaint with some people on the Kitechs, especially when you drop down to a little bit smaller size. But otherwise, it's interesting. You look at these two side by side, and they're almost a mirror image of each other. So interesting. I don't know how they made the little difference there in the tail, but the bodies and the shape and profile look almost like the same thing. All right, for you newer folks out there, let's talk about the three main ways that I rig these. Number one is just your standard Texas rig. So just like I would rig a worm or a creature bait, I've got a little weight that I've pegged on there. That's a 3/16 ounce tungsten. Put a little bobber stop on there, and that's just how I would run it. Now with these, you want to make sure you use a heavier wire hook. That heavier wire hook keeps the belly of this swim bait down so it swims normal. Otherwise, if you've got a real light one or the swim bait wants to overpower it, it does have a tendency to roll. Now with this, one thing that I do is I tie the tri-lean knot here. Anything like this that I'm going to be swimming through grass and such, you can see it's only got the one tag in there and it sticks to the back. So once you've got your weight and everything on here, this is a very streamlined design. You don't have to worry about it hanging up. You can take this hook and bury it just a little bit like that, like you would on a worm. You can swim this through grass, wood, not a lot of issues with it getting stuck. Now the only one thing that I changed as I used these more was moving over to, instead of an EWG regular hook, I moved over to a screw lock hook. So you can see here, these just have a little screw in the front. You screw that into the bait, then when you rig your hook, just up in like that. To me, they seem to hold up a little bit better than just your regular EWG hook like this. You know, you catch a couple fish and that rips off pretty easy. Nice part about this is as it, comes off or whatever, it can kind of move around. Now you have to watch because on some of these screw lock type hooks, the screw that you put in front of there is kind of small and it will have a tendency to just rip out straight out the nose of the bait. And once you've destroyed that nose, you can't keep screwing it in. So one thing that I've done is switch to these. These are the owner centering pins. You can see there, it's a very large screw that screws into the front of that. It's got one little pin there. You just line that up in the nose of the bait in the middle of it, screw that in. It's got a lot more here, a lot more wire to grab into the meat of the nose of that bait. You don't tear them out as easy. Now, if you don't want to mess with rigging this all up, having to put the weight on and the bobber stop and all that, you want it to be all done in one for you? Well, that's where these hooks come into play. These are belly weighted or keel weighted screw lock hooks. You can see they've got the screws there on the nose of the hook. They got weights on the belly. And that's going to keep your swim bait running straight up and down. You don't have to mess with a bunch of stuff on the front of it. It's already got the weight to keep it running straight. Now, these belly weighted hooks also come in an underspin. So if you want to add a little flash to that, you can do so. And if these break off, I know Owner does sell extra replacements. These are the Owner flashy, what do they call them? Flashy swimmer, I believe. Those are the replacements for it. You can get little Colorado blades, willow blades, or if you want to do your own thing, these do have a little split ring on them there. You can change those out to whatever blade you want. Because these are so weedless, these are such a good option around, thick grass, wood, goes through, swims straight, doesn't get hung up. It's just one piece, one lure just like this. These are great when you want to slow roll the bottom. That weight kind of ticks the bottom. That swims right across there. You can slow roll it without, having an exposed open hook getting stuck in stuff. And that's a good point to bring up. When you take that hook in there and really bury it in there to keep it nice and weedless, that's kind of the downfall of this rig. It can have kind of a subpar hookup ratio. Well, that's the beauty of this third type, and that's just your regular open hook, swim bait, head type jig like these. It can be something as simple as this. This is just a little tiny 1/8 ounce darter head. You can see there it's got a pretty light wire hook for your finesse type applications. Very simple. You could always just use your regular round head jigs as well if you have those. You could bump up to something a little fancier like these. You can see they have the eyes, a little bit better keepers on there to keep that swim bait on there. That one even has a little screw-on keeper there. These are nice because they have kind of an upturned head there, a little nose that wants to glide over stuff and kind of ramp over cover and such, as opposed to the ball jig heads. They kind of get hung up a little bit more for me. So I find these come through, wood, come over wood and grass and stuff like that, just a little bit better. But remember, they do have that open hook, so they are more susceptible to getting snagged. Just remember to match that hook size to the type of combo you're using. If you've got a real heavy wire hook, you don't want to throw that on one of your little light combos. Now, similar to the belly weighted version, these also do come in underspins. This happens to be a little Cumberland underspin there. You can see that open style jig head with that little underspin on the bottom of it. Or you can see here I have one of the VMC type underspins already rigged up. Again, it's that open exposed hook. It's got that pointy swim bait style head to come through cover a little bit better, but also with that added flash of the underspin. I usually go to something like this when there's a little chop on the water and I want to add a little commotion. But it's interesting because when I talked to Hank, he had some other different viewpoints on the open hook. compared to the weedless style rig like that. So now that we've looked at these different rigs, let's go over and see what the BassGeek himself had to say about some tips for each one of these. I hit him up because I know the Swimbait is one of his confidence rigs. He fishes them a little bit differently than I do in a lot more clear water, so I figured why not? If we can put our heads together and provide more info for all of you, well, it's a win-win situation. Okay, tip number one. Hank and I both agreed that people seem to forget about the Florida rig, which is simply just a Swimbait with a heavy wire hook. Usually it's got a little bit of a weight on the bottom to keep that belly running straight down, you know, the Swimbait running true. But it's just a keel-weighted Swimbait that you fish over a lot of grass, you know, really thick vegetation on the top. That weedless design helps keep you from getting hung up, you know, so if you're in lily pads, if you're around grass lines, you can really fish this type of rig just like you would a frog. That hook's buried up in there so you don't have to worry about it getting hung on pads and such. You can take it over the top of the real thick stuff, and when you get to a hole in the vegetation, you can stall it and let it drop down in there. Any fish that are looking up on that, oftentimes you get a bite. All right, switched up, trying the Miyagi here, no weight on it. Seeing if the paddle tail will do anything when I get it to these holes and kind of let it sink. Oh, just like that. You can swim it on top, you can wake it, you can swim it along those grass lines, over the top of stuff. A very versatile rig, something you can turn to and kind of use as a 1-2 punch in your frog type spots. All right, tip number two, the weedless rig is something that Hank uses around timber. He slow rolls it deeper, almost the same way that I always use a spinnerbait here in kind of my stained dirty water. He's fishing in a lot clearer water normally than I do, so that real natural swim bait look is what he turns to as a search bait. Now, one interesting thing that he said he does is he'll use this belly weighted hook with maybe like a light 1/4 ounce weight on the bottom. But he'll also add a little tiny, like 1/8 ounce to the front of it to keep that whole thing nice and aerodynamic, coming through any of the wood and any stuff like that. You know, instead of having a blunt end like this, meeting and hitting stuff, you add just a little tiny bullet weight to the front of that, and it's going to come through stuff a lot easier. Something that I'd never thought of doing, simple little thing, but I'm glad he shared that. So if you're fishing clearer water around a lot of timber and stuff, don't be afraid to pick up the swim bait and use it as a search bait. Okay, tip number three, moving over to this open hook design, the two biggest assets of this rig is the most natural. Number one, you know, it's just got the one little hook here. You've got the swim baits that have eyes on them. You can make it look like a very natural, real presentation. And number two, it's got the best hookup ratio out of all these. It's got an exposed hook. So as soon as that bass comes over to grab it, it's already got a hook there exposed, ready to set into it. So this is a versatile search bait that still really will come over a lot of things pretty well. You know, as long as you're moving it at a pace, keeping your rod tip up, you know, so that can carry them over things, not letting it sink down in the brush and then trying to get it out. This will come over wood, you know, big logs and stuff like that, still relatively well. And when you think about it, that open hook design is why oftentimes you see a lot of these bigger swim baits with that one big open exposed hook, because once that fish takes it, you've really got to set that hook into them. That exposed hook is really going to help. And that brings up to a good point on this tip, is that if you're running something like this, say a belly weighted swim bait like that with the hook hidden up in there, you want to stay nice and weedless, that's great. But if you're getting a lot of fish swiping at it and grabbing it and you're setting the hook and missing them, try switching over to something like this with an exposed hook. Maybe not that drastic of a change, but something more like that on there. So in case those fish are just kind of grabbing it or swiping at it, not truly 100% committing, you can get away with getting a lot of those bites having that open exposed hook. Okay, now tip number four was interesting to me because Hank, the Bass Geek himself, gave me some new info and a different way of looking at when you fish just a regular swim bait like this versus the underspin. Now, we agreed that the underspin adds more drawing power, right? You know, if you've got just a regular paddle tail, the only thing you've really got working for you is that it looks natural and just a little bit of a paddle to the tail. But if you want a little more drawing power and you add that underspin on it, you've now got the flash of the underspin, you've got the thump of the underspin, and you've still got all the water displacement of this tail and everything all together, but just a little bit more going for it. But what I found interesting is he said he'll usually go with a 5 or 6 inch larger swim bait as a search bait. And if he can get those fish to come out for it, you know, grab it, kind of attack it. But if he's just getting fish that are swiping at it, but really not committing to it, he will often go down to, say, a 3 inch swim bait like this with an underspin on it. And those fish that he couldn't really get to commit on that little bit larger swim bait might completely start turning around and biting a little bit smaller swim bait with the underspin, specifically with the underspin, because that's what the underspin is doing, is mimicking, you know, a small school of fish, a little bit better meal. Something like that, you know, especially if you look at one like that, if you had a little 3 inch swim bait on there, plus the flash of that, looks like a tiny little ball of bait going through there. So I find that interesting, just a little bit different way of thinking about that and switching up. You know, sometimes I get stuck in that, you know, one line train of thought that if I'm throwing, you know, a regular swim bait and they're kind of swiping at it and not really committing to it, I would probably look at throwing something else, completely different to try and get them to commit. Maybe a lipless, maybe a square bill, whatever it is, instead of just making that one little small change and going over from a regular swim bait like this to an underspin. I found that interesting, a little bit different way to think about it. All right, fishing friends, that's going to do it for tonight. We looked at some of the new swim baits that I've been using. I discussed the 3 easy common ways that I rig these, and we even discussed some tips on when and where to use these, courtesy of Hank, aka the Bass Geek. If you haven't already, do yourself a favor and go subscribe to Hank over there at the Bass Geek channel. He's a very good dude, and he can certainly teach you a thing or two about bass fishing, so I'll leave his channel link below for you. Now, I'd like to hear from all of you out there, so comment below and let me know if you're using any new type of swim bait. Maybe you just picked up a Huddleston, you want to talk about it. Some new crazy swim bait paddle tail on the market, maybe that I've never even heard of. Comment below and let me know. And finally, tonight's subscribe fishing friend shout out goes to Martin the Fisherman. Martin's part of the notification squad and is always one of the first few people to watch and comment, so Martin, thank you, sir. I appreciate you, and I think everybody else out there who watches. Really does mean a lot to me, but that's it. It is late. I got to get to bed, so thank you all for watching, and until next time,